I was bullied as a kid. I actually had suicidal thoughts and actually tried 4 different times, tried killing myself. Through all of that, I learned more and more by meeting a lot of people and spending a lot of time trying to find help and everything. I learned about the troubles of what it is to go through everything I was going through and not get the help that I needed. So I eventually, as I became an adult and everything, and after I survived all this stuff, I started thinking about how could I use what I know to help other people. The second reason why I wrote it was actually an answer to the media. Actually, I'd see it on Fox News, I'd see it on CNN, NBC, CBS, all these different news stations, and how every time there was an act of violence in a school, or there was a bullying event that took place, and it made it to the news. What would happen would be that the media personalities on the TV would be asking the same questions every single time. Why is this happening? Why does it continue to happen? What can we do to stop this? Things like that. And I thought to myself, why isn't somebody coming out with answers about that? I also heard on the news media, I would hear them bring in experts, psychologists, psychiatrists, and various other experts. And I quote the experts and stuff simply because I don't consider people to be experts that act like they do on TV about these certain instances. You see a school shooting, and all of a sudden, and I understand the human thought about coming out and saying, that guy's an idiot for doing that. I understand that stuff, but if you're a professional psychiatrist, psychologist, something like that, you would have to think that those people would understand calling people names, whether the person's dead, because he killed himself or whatever, or got shot by police and everything in the incident, or he's still alive and stuff. Calling that person names isn't gonna answer any questions. It's not really helping the narrative. And I thought to myself, as a victim myself, how would I feel if I knew that somebody's calling me these names and stuff after I reached out, things like this. And then I started researching into different events, different shootings that have taken place in schools and workplaces and things like that. And I started researching into how these stories, they hit the news, you hear about the shooting and everything, and everybody comes out with the same thought. That shooter, that was terrible of them to do that, it was wrong of them to do that, things like that. And it's the immediate response. What happens though is that if you wait a couple of days, a week, a month later, you start finding out the backstory to the person who actually came in with the weapons. And you start figuring out that these people who are doing the shooting, 9 times out of 10, they're actually victims themselves. They're people that have been bullied. They're people that have been stomped upon throughout a period of time. Could be their lives, could be a few years, could be 6 months and stuff that they've been dealing with it. And maybe they've been looking for help, but for some reason they're not getting the help that they need. Maybe they're afraid to ask for help and stuff, and so they have the mental problems and stuff, but they're not reaching out for the help. And so they get themselves up against a wall, and they feel like the only thing they can do is act out on their frustrations and their anger. And they gather some weapons up, and they go into schools or workplaces, and they shoot people. And that's how they do it.
And that's the wrong thing to do. You have to keep on trying and just make it to another day.
Oh, absolutely.
And I actually shared with you earlier that I am very fortunate that the governor is going to do something lighting up the State House. It's going to be the second time for traumatic brain injury. But as a traumatic brain injury survivor, I wasn't bullied by a person, I was bullied by the system. I couldn't get the help that I needed, and I just came to a very low point one night, and it was, I didn't care if I lived or died any longer. And I've never spoken to anyone about this, that actually is in your shoes. So I just didn't care. Well, maybe there was a slight little bit of it, but the pain got so bad that I just couldn't deal with it anymore. And I was very thankful to make it to another day. Very thankful that you failed. It's not very often that you tell people that you're glad that they failed. I'm glad that you failed 4 times. So now with myself, I never tried to take my life, but I know that pain. And I saw somebody write something online one time, and it was about somebody that did commit suicide. And they said, "Oh my God, how selfish is that person?" And what I wrote back to them is, do you know how much pain that somebody has to be in to want to take their own life. It's one thing to be so mad at somebody else that maybe you want to take their life, but when you want to take your own life, you are in a very, very bad spot. And yes, you do need help at that point in time.
Yes.
And I'm glad that you have this book out. I think that it'll help a lot of people. And I'm supporting another group, the Josh Legacy Foundation. I was telling you about them. I hope that the two of you work together
Sure.
because I hadn't heard any of your story prior to you really sharing it with me today. So I find it to be very inspiring. Now, through the process, you were sharing another part of the story with me is just prior to turning the camera on, and I found that to be very interesting. So you had met a professional baseball umpire,
Correct.
and you were sharing information with him that your family and your parents didn't even know. So go through that again, and let's discuss that.
Sure. So, anyways, those are the two reasons why. Is because I see the news media making the comments
Yes.
and things like that. So that's the reason why.
Yes, and I understand they're wrong. I understand they're
Sure.
wrong because
Sure.
they're doing the same thing that the other person was doing online.
Right.
That, they were saying that how selfish is this person? That they're clueless.
And asking the
They're-
same questions.
They're clueless.
Yeah.
They're clueless to what's really going on. So I
So-
find that to be very important. Yes.
So with the umpire, it was a chance meeting that turned into a friendship that lasted for several months during the off season of the baseball season. So over the winter months, one year, many years ago, it was Ron Luciano. I actually met him when my dad was bowling, and this gentleman comes walking in, and I was the only person sitting there as a kid. I was 8, 10 years old, something like that. And he comes walking in and sat down right next to me and introduced himself. And I knew who he was by watching TV and seeing the Yankee games and things like that on TV, because I grew up in upstate New York, and I grew up a Yankee fan. And I actually finally got over that illness, but and moved on. But suffice to say that when Ron Luciano came in and sat next to me, we got talking, and next thing I know, he's asking my dad if it's okay if he buys me lunch. And we went down to the cafeteria at the IBM Country Club in Endicott, New York. And we sat down, and he started talking to me and asked me about school, and that was my trigger. My parents knew that I was having trouble in school. My sister was straight A's, I wasn't, and I was always compared to my sister. My sister and my father were actually bullies of mine too. So I was getting bullied in school and at home, and it was difficult to talk to my parents about the bullying I was dealing with, because they would just laugh at me and say, well, that stuff doesn't happen in our schools, much like many other parents and stuff. Oh, that doesn't happen. They ignore the problem and stuff until all of a sudden they're like, oh, that actually happened in our town. And that's another little bug up my butt about things like that. Don't ignore the problem. Realize that there is a problem in the community and do something about it.
Well,
But anyways, getting back to the umpire.
That was something
Sure.
I hope that you were going to be talking about as a question I wanted to ask. Maybe it didn't happen to you, but maybe you knew about somebody else that was being bullied by the family member. So actually you experienced that.
Yes.
So I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. Getting back to the umpire though, Ron Luciano and I went down and we talked. He asked me about school, and that was my trigger. I opened up to him about how my grades weren't very good in school, and about how I was having trouble. I could never read in class and everything very well. It was one of the problems I discussed with him, and I explained to him how trying to read out loud, especially in class, was embarrassing, because I'd stutter over my words and everything, simply because I didn't see the words correctly. The letters got all mixed up and everything, and it wasn't until I became an adult that I realized that's called dyslexia. Back when I was a kid, that wasn't even a word. Nobody even knew what dyslexia was. So it turns out I had dyslexia all those years, and my parents and teachers and things like that would always just call me stupid because I couldn't read and everything. And they're like, well, stop pretending you can't read. We know you can read. But they couldn't understand what I was trying to tell them, that I couldn't. Ron Luciano actually understood it, and he kind of coached me through a couple things, and told me there's nothing that he can do to fix that for me, but he gave me some ideas of how to explain to people how to deal with things, and that kind of opened up a whole discussion into how being picked on about not being able to read, And then I opened up to him about how I was beaten up all the time. I was always pushed around the hallways and tripped and kicked and punched and everything. And by the time I met him, actually, I had already been severely beaten up several times and everything, to the point that my school uniform, going to Catholic school, my school uniform was destroyed a couple of times. And my dad got really upset with me because he's like, why do you keep destroying your uniforms? And it wasn't me, it's the other kids ripping it and shredding it and everything and stuff, but somehow it's my fault all the time. So that's how that's kind of went on like that.
Did this umpire have dyslexia himself, or how did he know what you were dealing with?
He actually didn't understand it himself. That's the thing about some people that I talked to as I grew up. They didn't necessarily understand, or in that they didn't live through the same problems I did, so they didn't understand it in that way. So he really didn't understand about having trouble reading. He was actually a really good reader. He loved to read. He actually wrote his own several books himself. So he kind of talked to me as if I was equal with him, on an equal standing, kind of on the same playing field, so to speak. And so he said, listen, he says, he says, when I open up a book and I sit down to read something, I read what's there because that's what I see. He says, I don't understand what you're saying about that you don't see it the same way, but even if I don't understand it and I can't see things the way that you see them, he says, I understand you have a problem. So let's address the problem. The problem is you can't read like other people can read. So how can we work around that and everything? And he says that just like in sports, and this is where he started getting into an explanation about how sports, any sport you play and stuff, is just like life itself. Mm-hmm. In a case of you can't read and everything and stuff, well, if you can't read, it's just like if you can't hit a ball. You figure out how to do it because that's what you need to do to be successful. You need to know how to read to be able to move on in your life and everything, and know how to learn how to do things. In baseball, you can't hit unless you can hit the ball, unless you can see that ball and everything and focus on it and make that ball make contact, or make that bat make contact with the ball. And then he opened up into a wider understanding about baseball. And it was kind of interesting stuff how he put it. And it made me kind of rethink what I was going through with the bullies at the time. It wasn't until I was an adult that I really started putting into play what he was actually explaining to me. But simply put, he said, every game starts the same way. It's a score of 0-0. You have two different opposing teams and everything that have to face each other, and both teams are going for the same thing. They're going for a win. They're trying to get runs, trying to get hits and runs and everything, and score those runs and everything to become the best one at that game. And that game translates into another game and everything, and so on and so forth, until you finally reach the end of the season and everything, and you see there's playoffs and then the World Series. And of course, at that time, there was only one round of playoffs and then the World Series. So he basically pointed out that life is much like that, because in just like a baseball game, you start out life with a 0. And then as you go through your life and stuff, you learn how to walk. You learn how to crawl, you learn how to walk, you learn how to talk, you learn how to communicate in different ways. You learn how to be active in different ways, whether it be in sports, academically, these different ways and everything and stuff, but you make your way through the game of life, just like you do in sports.
Now, how old were you when you first experienced bullying, and also when did you feel that you started getting depressed and things of that nature, and were you being bullied, do you believe, or were you being bullied because you think that you had a disability?
No, originally I don't think I was bullied because of a disability. I was a little shy, but it was kindergarten, first day of kindergarten, and it was after my mom had walked my sister and I to school, and she had my brother in the stroller, my younger brother in the stroller. And on the way to school, going to kindergarten, my sister stopped and turned around and told my mom, "Listen, I don't want Steve anywhere near me when we're in school, because I don't want anybody to know he's my brother." So that was kind of the first clue that something's fishy here. Something doesn't seem to really make sense to me. And then we got to school, and my mom walked me to kindergarten class because that was the custom back then. I'm not sure what goes on now, but the parent used to walk you right to the kindergarten classroom and stuff, and greet the teacher, and you'd meet the teacher and things like that, and and that was it. Well, in my case, my mom left me at the kindergarten there and talked to the teacher briefly, and I stepped in, and the teacher told me to go over and play with the other kids, which they had some playground equipment inside the room, and I was scared. I was like, there's a bunch of other kids over there. I don't know any of them. So I decided I looked around the room, and I saw one little boy standing behind the teacher's desk, and he was looking out the window, but there was a little fishbowl sitting on the windowsill. So I went over and I introduced myself to him, and his response to me was he just looked at me and looked back at the fishbowl, and he picked it up, turned to me, and just dumped it on me. Dumped the water and the fish and everything and stuff out right there. My pants are wet. The fish is flopping around the floor, and I'm thinking to myself, I want to save the fish and everything. And no sooner did that thought come in my mind about reaching down to grab the fish and save him, and I see his foot come over and stomp on the fish. And next thing I know, he's running across the room, and he's pointing back at me and saying he killed the fish. He killed the fish. And I got accused of killing the classroom fish. All the other kids were in shock. They were like, they all hated me all of a sudden, just instantly. They all hated me. So every kid I was in school with now hates me. First day of school, kindergarten. And the teacher comes over and says, "Why did you do that?" "I didn't do it. I didn't do this. Stop lying." I was told. I was repeatedly told, "Stop lying, Steve. You need to tell the truth." I'm telling the truth. I didn't do it. Next thing I know, I'm being dragged by my ear. I'm being dragged through the hallway up to the principal's office, and the principal's being told the same lie, that I killed the fish, and it just continued on from there. My mom was told the same lie. My dad was told it. My dad got home and beat me because of it. Smacked me around quite a bit because of it, and that's where the bullying started. Stuff the first day of school, kindergarten.
So then how long did you stay? And you were in a private school, so how long did you go through school with these people?
With those people, I was in the same grade with them all the way through till 8th grade.
Eight years.
I went through a school, Blessed Sacrament Elementary School, which is now defunct now, and St. James Middle School, both in Johnson City, New York. And then I went on to high school at Johnson City Senior High School.
Well, I went to a Catholic school, so I can understand why your clothes were ripped up. It was kind of rough and Catholic school. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
But this doesn't happen in Catholic schools. Bullying doesn't happen. We don't have those kind of problems in Catholic schools.
I understood what you're saying, and actually, I did chuckle when you said your sister didn't want to, because kids are kids, and they just so. I didn't.
That's the thing. I kind of chalked it up like that. That's my sister and sister-brother relationship and everything. But then it grew from there over the years with my sister. I've got scars on my hands from her biting me and scratching me and stabbing me with pencils and everything else stuff. So it grew into much worse and everything, especially when she'd lie to my dad and stuff about me doing things just to see my dad come home and beat me up.
Has the relationship changed that you're adults?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, my father passed away several years ago. My mom just passed away a couple of weeks ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. But my sister and I, we've patched things up over the years. We've grown to understand that was then. Same thing I do with the bullies. A lot of the bullies that bullied me in school, I've spoken with them, a lot of them, and I've told them, listen, you know the way it was back in school. You know how much you picked on me, how much you beat me up and things. I said, listen, I have no hard feelings. I forgive you for all of that. I put it in the past and everything, and then I thanked them. I said, if it wasn't for you treating me the way that you did, I wouldn't have the lessons that I've learned in my life, so that I could tell other people these stories and help other people get through the problems that they're dealing with.
Now I'm jumping around a little bit, and you're doing an excellent interview here, but there was something else that you shared with me about another person that's amazing. You had some amazing people that you had help you through this. So what can you tell me about the other person that helped you through this?
Well, another one of the several people I met was a gentleman that played billiards. I've seen him on TV and many times. I know who the guy was. Funny thing is that when he walked in the doors to the billiard hall at the IBM Country Club, and I was all by myself playing on the best table in the room. There's like 20 tables in there and everything. I'm playing on the best table in the room, and this guy comes walking in, this old man with this entourage of 4 or 5 people with him. He comes walking in and everything, and they all look around the room and everything. They realize I'm on the best table. So the old man comes up to me and says, "Would you mind if I play a game with you?" I said, "Not at all, sir, not at all." So I said, "I'll rack them up when we're done, everything you can break."
But you knew who he was when...
I did not know at first.
Oh, you didn't?
Not at first.
Okay,
Even
okay.
though I said on TV and everything and stuff, I was like,
It took you a while.
It took me a little bit and stuff. It wasn't until he allowed me to break, and I broke and stuff, and I sunk 1 ball, and I was able to sink 1 other ball before I couldn't come up with a shot. So I did what I've seen this guy do on TV all the time and stuff, and I hid the cue ball behind some balls to make it a more difficult shot for him for his first shot. Next thing I know, he grabs his pool cue and everything. And he walks over to the table. He kind of walks around a little bit. He looks at the cue ball and he's looking at a couple of balls and he calls a shot. And I'm like, "That's impossible. You can't make that shot. There's no way." And everything. Next thing I know, he's got his cue way up in the air and he was looking down. And he nails that ball, and that ball jumped up off the table, landed over here, nailed one of his other balls, which that ball and the other ball that ball hit and stuff both rolled and went in the pocket. And he got 2 of his balls in just like that. And I looked at him, I go, "You're Willie Mosconi. You are Willie Mosconi." I said, "Unbelievable." I said, "I had no idea that you'd ever be here." He explained to me that they were actually on their way from, I believe it was Chicago or Detroit or something like that. They were on their way down to New York City. There's actually a video of Willie Mosconi and Minnesota Fats playing a tournament in New York City, and it's on YouTube. You can look it up, and that was his destination. He was on his way there. Turns out I understood that they did a lot of road traveling and stuff because Willie would like to occasionally stop in places and stuff and get a little practice in, once in a while and everything. And so that's what they did is they actually called some, I don't know who they called. They may have called Ron Luciano for all I know. And but they called some friends and everything in the southern tier area of New York. And they asked, "Hey, where can we stop to shoot some pool before on our way down there?" And everything. And so somebody recommended them to stop at the IBM Country Club. And that they have a great pool hall up there with a lot of tables and everything that's usually empty this time of the day on a Saturday afternoon. So they did. They stopped in, and there I was. I was just shooting pool all by myself, just because that was one of the few places I knew I could go where I could be by myself, and I didn't have to worry about bullies teasing me and stuff because I could be by myself.
You had some other people help too?
Yes, Father Dan when I was a kid, and he taught me a lot of lessons about how he actually made me understand more about the Bible and about what I can learn from the Bible than anybody else in my life. It was amazing how he was able to relate biblical verses to what was going on in my life, not necessarily with the bullying and stuff, but just about how, for instance, there's a gentleman by the name of Rush Limbaugh who has a national talk show and everything. And he has always said about words mean things. Well, Father Dan, well before Rush Limbaugh was ever on the air with his show, Father Dan actually taught me about words mean things, and he came up with these 3 different verses of about how the Bible teaches you that lesson. So I actually learned about how words mean things from Father Dan. But there's that's one of those stories that you'd have to get the book to read it and everything.
Well, you went to Catholic school, so you have a religious background.
Yes.
So did your faith help you through some of the stuff that you were going through?
More or less. It wasn't until later in life and everything that I allowed faith back into my life. I always had faith in God. My dad took offense to me when I would see him go to church. Both my parents go to church. My dad was very involved in the Catholic Church, being an usher and getting into the Knights of Columbus and things like that. But the problem I had was that he was so saintly to the church and stuff, as far as helping the church out and doing all these different volunteer things for the church, But then he'd come home and he'd throw me down the stairs, he'd kick me around the house and stuff, punch me and call me names and yell and scream and swear and everything else stuff. And I thought to myself, this seems quite hypocritical. I mean, I'm a little kid and stuff, and I learned about the word hypocrite and everything, and I thought, that's my dad. And it made me really question the Catholic Church. I'm not saying that other religions, other kids, other people don't have the same problem following other religions. People are people, and I understand that now as an adult. But as a child, going through all this and everything, I thought to myself, this is weird. Why is my dad so liked at church and stuff, and he behaves so much differently at church? But then he comes home and he behaves totally the opposite. It just didn't make sense to me.
Well, I don't think that just happens in the Catholic Church.
No,
but I want to add for anyone else that will watch this that actually my faith helped me out tremendously.
Yes.
So I'm very happy about that.
Well, it was when I was 18 years old, I told my dad, I said, I'm not going back to the Catholic Church. I'm not going to any more masses. I'm going to go explore Judaism and Episcopalians and various other religions. So I spent a number of decades looking at other religions and spending time reading the Torah and the Quran, the English version of the Quran, and various other things, and learning about other religions and understanding the fact that every religion has a general belief in a superior being above all people. And some religions believe in multiple gods, and some religions believe in a single God or Allah or whatever. But the point is that I finally came to the conclusion where, how could I choose one religion over another? So I get criticized for this all the time from people that are in their particular religion. But I tell people, I said, listen, I'm just one human being that I'm trying to understand, this whole mentality of all these different religions, and how can you say that the Catholics are better than the Jewish and the Jewish are better than this? It doesn't make sense to me. So I try to welcome everybody into my heart. I understand them and stuff because I've done the studying, I've learned about them. I can't quote things from any biblical things or anything stuff. I can't sit here and just pull them out of my head like that. But the fact is that I treat everybody with the respect that they deserve. And until they prove to me that they don't deserve that.
Well, I go to a lot of different churches and I see them pointing fingers at other people, and I'm like, if you are a person of God, why are you doing that? Actually, you need to be friendly and inclusive. That's the way I look at it. So now, is there any advice that you have for anybody that may be going down a dark path to help them out?
Biggest thing is if you have thoughts, if you're being bullied, there are places where you can go. There's people that you can call. There's even some internet chat boards where you can actually text them or email them, and they will respond to you, and they will help you through, help you understand things, and help you come up with solutions as to how to deal with bullying. And then with suicide and everything, if you're having suicidal thoughts, obviously call 911, call the suicide helplines that are out there. Those numbers are actually in my book. I have contact information in my book about that at the end of the forward section in my book. But mainly, just reach out and don't be afraid to talk to people. And if one person says I can't help you, or if one person says oh, you're making that up, ignore them. Go on to somebody else and just keep looking until you find somebody that will help you, because there are people out there that want to help. You just have to keep looking.
Amazingly, I was interviewing a husband and wife that had a child that the kids were picking on him at school, and they were telling him to take his life. And I've read many different things online, especially for parents to parents. They're doing a wonderful job helping people. But the kids a lot of kids are taking their lives now. It's a very stressful world and everything. So just there are people out there that are trying to help. Now, that's information is important. So, but please let's see your book. And
Sure. It's called Bullied Nearly to Death, Loving My Life. My writer name is actually S. Hunter Smith. And if you go on Amazon or Barnes & Noble right now, it is on both of those websites. It's available in paperback. In a matter of a week or two, it will be available in ebook format and all of the ebook formats. and we're hoping to get it out into the bookstores also, and I'm working toward that right now. It tends to be a long book and stuff. For some people, it's 276 pages. It'll probably take me 6 months to read it myself, just because of my learning difficulties that I have. It took me 10 years to write it, to put it all together and write it and everything. But it's the love of my life right now is to get out there, to get this book out there in as many hands as possible, so that people can read it and people can learn from my life and about how I tell my story, about doing it in chronological order about what I went through. I talk about the suicide attempts in depth, about what my thoughts were going into the suicide attempts, what my thoughts were during the suicide attempts, actually acting it out, and what my thoughts were afterwards, and about how I made some bad decisions after I failed to kill myself. I felt as though that's, what else can I do? So then I decided to pick up weapons, and I took weapons to school. Thank God I never used them. I don't think anybody ever saw me with them, but one time I brought loaded guns to school, and I was ready to use them. But if it wasn't for the kind word of just one person putting their hand on my shoulder and stuff and saying something kind to me, I probably would have taken out many people and possibly killed myself right there too. But that's the thing about my book is it tells people, it walks them through the actual mindset of what I went through, what the bullying did to my mentality, and what decisions I made because of that bullying, and how I was able to turn all that around and use it now as a tool to help other people.